The sun was barely up, casting long golden rays over the rolling hills of Arizona, where dust danced in the breeze and silence stretched wide across the land. The only sound came from the rhythmic creaking of the old wooden porch as Thomas Walker, a rugged rancher in his late 40s, sat hunched over in his chair, staring at the distant line of the horizon. His boots were covered in dry mud, his hands calloused from years of hard work, and his eyes, those tired sun-wrinkled eyes, carried the weight of decisions made and bridges burned. This morning was different though. It was the day his mother would leave the ranch for good. Just a few feet away, Mary Walker, his 74-year-old mother, stood in the doorway of the house she had once built with her late husband. Her suitcase sat on the porch beside her, old, scratched, and worn like her spirit, but packed tight. Thomas hadn't noticed, but inside that suitcase was something no one expected. Not food, not family mementos, but cold, hard cash. Not a few hundred or a couple of thousand, but over $1.4 million in neatly bundled bills hidden beneath layers of old sweaters and faded photo albums. But this isn't a story about money, not at first. This is a story about silence, distance, pride, and all the things left unsaid between a mother and a son who had once been close. Years ago, before Thomas became the hard, unbending man the land demanded, he used to laugh with Mary. He used to help her in the kitchen, race across the fields on horseback with her cheering from the porch, and sit with her by the fireplace during winter storms. But time, like a river carving through rock, changed them both. It started after his father died. The loss broke something in Thomas. He took over the ranch at just 25, carrying the weight of the family's legacy on his shoulders. He worked harder than anyone else in the valley. Cattle, fences, crops, everything became numbers, responsibilities, and pressure. Mary tried to help, tried to offer advice, but Thomas wouldn't listen. He wanted space. He wanted control. And when she questioned him, even gently, he snapped. "This is my ranch now," he said one night, loud enough for the whole house to hear. "I don't need you telling me how to run it." From that day on, Mary stepped back. She still cooked, she still cleaned, but she stopped talking about the ranch. She watched him grow colder, more distant, even to his own children. She knew her son had changed, but she didn't know how to reach him anymore. And then came the breaking point. The night she found out Thomas planned to sell the North Field, the very piece of land where her husband was buried. "You can't," she told him, her voice shaking. "I can," Thomas replied, not meeting her eyes. "That's your father's resting place. He's gone. Ma, this ranch is dying. I'm trying to save what's left." That argument exploded into weeks of tension. They barely spoke. His children watched quietly, unsure whose side to take. And one morning, without fanfare, Thomas told her to leave. "There's a place in town," he said flatly, "the Willow Home. They've got room. You'll be comfortable there." It wasn't a discussion. It was an order. And now, here they stood. Morning light spilling over the hills, the truck idling by the gate, and Mary gripping the handle of her suitcase, a suitcase she had carried through decades of love, loss, and quiet planning. Mary hadn't told anyone about the money, not even her grandchildren. She'd saved it slowly, selling off old silver, a few hidden land shares her husband had quietly bought decades ago, and bits of inheritance left by her sister. She never trusted banks, not after what they'd seen during the crash in the 80s. So, she kept it hidden, not because she was selfish, but because she was waiting for the right time. And now that time had come, but not in the way she'd imagined. She looked at Thomas, hoping for one last moment, a glance, a word, anything that would make this parting less cold. But he didn't look up. His jaw was clenched, eyes fixed on the dirt. The driver, a man from the town's transport service, stepped out of the truck and nodded respectfully. "Ready, ma'am?" Mary gave a quiet nod. "I suppose I am." She turned to her son one last time. "Thomas," she said softly. He didn't answer. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the truck. Each step felt like a lifetime. She paused once, just once, and glanced back. He was still on the porch, staring forward, like a statue carved by pride and pain. And then she was gone. What Thomas didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that the suitcase she left with contained more than money. It held the last chapter of their story. It held the power to rebuild what had been broken, but that would come later. But now, all he had was the quiet of the porch and the weight of his own silence. The sun was barely rising over the flat land when Ethan's mother, Marjorie Bell, stood quietly at the edge of the dusty road with her suitcase in hand. It was an old, scratched brown leather case, one she had carried for decades. The handle was worn smooth, and one of the metal latches was barely hanging on, but she held it tightly, like it held something more important than anyone could ever guess. Ethan didn't look back. He had walked her to the road, just before dawn, and left her there without a word. His boots had kicked up small clouds of dust, and he had said nothing as she softly called his name one last time. Double quotes, Ethan, ... But he had kept walking. Marjorie's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the handle. Her gray hair was tied in a neat bun, and her long faded dress fluttered gently in the early morning wind. The chill bit into her thin frame, but she didn't shiver. She had stood in colder places, faced harder moments, but nothing had prepared her for this feeling, the sting of being turned away by her own son. A single tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek, but she quickly wiped it away with the corner of her sleeve. She had raised that boy with everything she had. She had worked herself to the bone after her husband died. She had given Ethan the ranch, his father's land, and now he had told her that her ways were too old-fashioned, that she was just in the way, and it would be best if she left and found somewhere else to live. He had said it without anger. In fact, he had said it with a strange kind of calm, like he had already made peace with it long ago. But Marjorie hadn't, not yet. She looked up the road, waiting for the bus that only came once every 2 days. It would take her to the next town, a small, lonely place with a boarding house for widows. It wasn't home, but it would have to do. The suitcase beside her didn't just hold clothes, it held everything she had left. Or so Ethan thought. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that inside the lining of the old leather case sewn into the fabric, with hidden seams and folded carefully behind false panels, were stacks of old banknotes, some dating back 30 years. Marjorie had hidden them away one by one, year after year, whenever she could spare a little from the ranch profits. She had never told anyone, not even Ethan. She had started saving right after her husband died. Back then, the bank had tried to take the ranch, but Marjorie had stood firm, fighting them with every legal trick she could find. The fees were brutal. The stress was worse. But she had won. Barely. And from that day forward, she had sworn never to trust the banks again. Instead, she began hiding money. Quietly, safely. Slowly. She didn't need much. A few new boots here, a new stove there, but she never splurged. She lived simply. She baked her own bread, sewed her own dresses, never traveled, never dined out, but she saved, always. And over 30 years, that saving had grown. Now, as she stood at the road's edge, she thought of the moments she had stitched that money into the suitcase. She had done it during the quiet hours after everyone had gone to sleep. She had stayed up in her rocking chair, needle in hand, pushing thread through tough old leather. Her eyes had weakened over time, but her hands stayed steady. Each dollar she stitched in felt like a shield against whatever the world might throw at her next. And now, it was all she had left. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet, but she knew one thing: she wasn't going to let it go to waste. If Ethan didn't want her anymore, fine, she wouldn't beg. But she wasn't going to disappear quietly either. The bus finally appeared in the distance, just a small dot at first, then larger as it rumbled closer on the dirt road. The driver was a young man, chewing gum, music blaring faintly from his tiny speaker. He slowed down when he saw her and leaned over. "Ma'am, you headed to Hillstone?" Marjorie nodded. Her voice was hoarse. "Yes, hop on. Got plenty of room." She stepped onto the bus with effort, her old knees creaking. The suitcase felt heavier than ever, but she didn't complain. She found a seat near the window, placed the suitcase on her lap, and looked out as the bus drove away from the only home she had ever known. The ranch grew smaller in the distance, the barn, the fields, the windmill all fading. Her son didn't come out to wave goodbye. The road ahead was long, winding through dry hills and sleepy towns. Marjorie didn't speak to anyone. Her fellow passengers were strangers, farmhands, travelers, tired mothers with crying babies. But Marjorie just stared out the window, one hand resting protectively on her suitcase. At one stop, a curious little boy sitting across from her asked, "Is that suitcase heavy?" Marjorie smiled faintly. "Yes, dear, it carries a lifetime." He nodded like he understood, though he could, single quotes T. No one really could. By the time the bus pulled into Hillstone, the sun was high. It was a quiet town, older than most. The boarding house was a weathered white building with a crooked sign, "Sunny Rest for Ladies." Marjorie checked in without fuss. The woman at the front desk, Mrs. Leela, gave her a kind smile. "Room for is yours, dear. Meals at 6. We play cards on Sundays. You'll fit right in." Marjorie smiled politely and made her way upstairs. Room 4 was small but clean. A single bed, a desk, a window that looked out over the dry road. She placed the suitcase on the bed and sat beside it. And then, for the first time since Ethan had turned her away, she let herself cry. She cried not just for the hurt of being sent away, but for the years lost, the things unsaid, the moments missed. She had dreamed of dying on the ranch, being buried next to her husband under the tall oak tree where they had carved their initials. Now, she didn't know where she would be buried, or who would care. But even through the tears, a strange calm filled her heart, because deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. That night, she opened the suitcase. She didn't remove the lining or touch the money. She just looked at the old clothes folded neatly, and the small items tucked in the corners. A Bible, a photo of Ethan as a child, a tin of buttons, a letter from her husband she hadn't read in decades, and she whispered to herself, "You are still strong. You are still here." Outside, the wind blew softly through the trees, and inside, the suitcase full of secrets waited. The sun rose slowly over the dry land, spilling golden light over the silent ranch. Cows grazed in the far pasture. The windmill creaked gently, and the sound of silence was louder than ever before. Inside the small wooden house, the rancher sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee in his hands. His name was Luke. For 35 years, he had run this ranch with pride and stubborn strength. But today, all that pride felt hollow. His mother was gone. Not gone like the way death takes someone away. No, this pain was different. She was alive. She had walked away quietly, with her suitcase in hand, and tears hidden behind a tight-lipped smile. And he had let her go. No, not just let her, he had sent her away. The thought hit him again like a kick to the chest. Luke had told himself it was necessary, that he needed space, that she was getting in the way of his business, that her old stories, her quiet humming in the kitchen, her careful saving of leftovers, they were relics of a time long gone. But now, as the walls of the ranch house echoed back his loneliness, he wasn't so sure. He stood and walked over to the window. The barn stood tall, the same as it had for decades. His father built it, with his mother by his side. Luke remembered being a child, watching her paint the wooden doors red. He remembered her hands, calloused yet soft, guiding him as he learned to rope cattle. She wasn't just his mother, she was the heart of the land, and he had told her to leave. It had started with arguments, little things. She'd remind him to rest. He'd snap that he had work to do. She'd save money by mending old shirts instead of buying new ones. He saw it as her interfering. Slowly, he began to see her presence not as comfort, but as a burden. Maybe it was his pride. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe, he thought bitterly, he was just a fool. I'll be all right, she had said that morning, suitcase in hand, standing by the truck. Don't worry about me. He hadn't even asked where she was going. Days passed, then weeks. Luke worked the ranch in silence. No soft humming from the kitchen, no warm light from her bedroom, no gentle voice reminding him to eat or sleep. Just the howling wind at night and the endless creak of the windmill. One night, he couldn't take the silence anymore. He picked up the old family photo album. Dust clung to the cover. Inside were photos of simpler times, him as a baby in her arms. Him as a boy riding his first horse, her smile bright as sunshine even through hard winters. His throat tightened. He remembered the day she sold her wedding ring, just to buy him a new saddle when the old one broke. He remembered how she stayed up all night nursing him when he caught fever as a child. She had done everything for him, and what had he done? He pushed his chair back and stood. He needed to find her, apologize, make it right. But where was she? He checked her old room. On the dresser was a letter he had never opened. He picked it up, hands trembling. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting neat. My dearest son, I know you think I'm just in the way now, and maybe I am. You're a grown man, strong, independent. I always knew you would be, but my heart will always see you as the boy who scraped his knees and ran to me crying. The boy I prayed for when he stayed out late. The man I watched grow into someone his father would be proud of. I didn't leave with anger, I left with love. Because sometimes, love means knowing when to step away. There's money in the old suitcase. I saved it over the years. For your future. For the ranch. For when you're ready. Please don't be angry, just remember me kindly. Mom. Luke's legs gave out, and he sank to the bed. The suitcase, he hadn't opened it. He thought it was just clothes and keepsakes. He ran to the closet where he had stored it, dusted it off, and opened the latches. Stacks of bills, neatly tied, notes wrapped around them. $1.4 million. His breath caught in his chest. His mother had been saving for decades. Small earnings, odd jobs, selling crafts, investments. All this time, she was building a safety net for him. For the ranch, for the family legacy. And he had sent her away without even a goodbye. The pain that hit him wasn't just guilt. It was shame. He called the banks, checked nearby towns. No one had seen her. He even drove to the nearby retirement community. No sign. He checked bus stations, shelters. He left messages. Weeks turned to months. The ranch ran, but without joy, without love, without her. Then, one rainy afternoon, as he sat on the porch watching storm clouds gather, a rusted old truck pulled into the driveway. The engine sputtered, the door creaked open, and she stepped out. Her coat was too thin. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes held the same strength they always had. Neither of them spoke at first. Then Luke stood, walked over, and wrapped his arms around her. I'm so sorry. Mom, he whispered, voice shaking. I know, she said softly, patting his back. They stood like that in the rain, letting the silence say what words couldn't. That night, they sat at the kitchen table. She made tea, just like she used to. He showed her the suitcase. She just smiled. I saved because I believed in you, she said. Luke looked into her eyes and finally understood what he had nearly lost. Not just the money, not just the ranch, but the most precious thing of all, his mother's love. The sky over the ranch was painted in soft orange and purple as the sun began to set. Jack stood at the edge of the porch, staring at the long road that stretched out like a ribbon between the hills. It had been 2 months since his mother had left. The house was quiet, too quiet. The laughter, the quiet shuffling of her feet, the way she'd gently scold him for forgetting meals, it was all gone. At first, he thought he'd feel relief. But now, every room echoed with emptiness. Jack kept busy to distract himself. He fed the horses, mended fences, and even cleaned the old barn that hadn't seen a broom in years. But no matter how hard he worked, something inside him was restless. A strange kind of guilt gnawed at him when he sat down for dinner, alone. He remembered the day he sent her away. Her eyes were calm, her suitcase small, and she didn't argue. That silence haunted him now. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It was handwritten, addressed in his mother's neat script. His heart raced as he opened it, unsure what it might say. Inside was a simple note. Dear Jack, I hope you're well. I've found peace where I am, and I want you to do the same. There's something I want you to know. Check the suitcase, the brown one I left in the attic. Love, Mom. Jack blinked. The attic, the brown suitcase. He rushed up the creaky stairs and pulled open the dusty attic door. Cobwebs clung to the beams, and old boxers lay scattered in the corners. And there, beneath an old quilt, was the brown suitcase. He opened it. Froze. Bundles of money, neatly stacked, filled the inside. His hands trembled. He sat back on the floor, staring at the suitcase like it might disappear. It wasn't just a little money, it was a lot, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. He couldn't believe his eyes. He counted one stack, then another. They were real, and tucked inside was a small envelope. Inside the envelope was a note. It read, Jack, this money isn't for you to spend carelessly. It's everything I saved over the years. From sewing work, old investments, a few things I never told you about. I always planned to leave it to you, but I wanted you to know what it feels like to live without help. To know the weight of your choices. You're a good man, Jack, but you forgot how to be a son. Maybe this will help you remember. Use this wisely. It's not just money. It's my love, in a different form. Mom. Jack's eyes filled with tears. He sat in the attic for hours, holding that letter. He remembered every small thing she had done for him. Cooking meals when he came in late, mending his clothes without being asked, watching him from the porch as he rode out each morning. And he remembered how he ignored her, brushed her aside, and told her she was a burden. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, the suitcase on the floor beside him. He didn't care about the money, not anymore. What mattered was the woman who gave it to him, the one he had turned away. The next day, Jack packed a bag. He asked around town, until someone mentioned a quiet boarding house in the next state. An older lady was staying there, polite, gentle, and always humming old country songs. Jack knew it was her. He drove 4 hours, heart pounding, unsure what he would say. When he reached the boarding house, he sat in the truck for 10 minutes, hands gripping the wheel. Finally, he stepped out and walked to the porch. She was sitting there, knitting. She looked up. Her eyes didn't show anger, just surprise and something else, relief. Jack, she said softly. He dropped to his knees before her. Mama, I'm so sorry, he whispered. I didn't know, I didn't understand. I don't care about the money, I just want you to come home. She didn't speak for a long moment, then she touched his face. You grew up, didn't you? She said gently. I should have done it sooner, Jack said. She smiled. Maybe, but better late than never. They sat there for a long time, saying little. Words weren't needed anymore. Jack had changed and she saw it. When they returned to the ranch, everything felt different. The rooms weren't quiet anymore. His mother took back her spot at the kitchen table. The animals seemed calmer. Even the air felt warmer. Jack used some of the money to repair the ranch, but most of it went into a trust in her name. He also started a local fund to help elderly folks in the area who'd been forgotten by their families. People whispered about it in town, calling it the Mother's Fund. But Jack didn't care about attention. He had his mother back. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the horses grazed in the distance, Jack stood beside her on the porch. You know, he said, I thought I lost everything when I lost Dad. She nodded. You lost him, but you didn't lose me. Jack turned to her. I know that now. And in that golden light, with the wind blowing soft and the ranch peaceful once more, Jack finally felt whole. Would you like a PDF or Word document version of this chapter 4?